So I finally get to do a video talking about observers and onlookers. So obviously, if you know the BlazBlue story from the localization, because I guess that's a bunch of how people who know English would know BlazBlue. You may have heard the term observer thrown around. An observer, in simple terms, is an individual who is able to create phenomena intervention that allows them to essentially acknowledge something's existence and turn it into a reality. Now, I already made a video explaining phenomena intervention, but to quickly get it out of the way, phenomena intervention is a technique that observers possess which allows them to manipulate phenomena by altering one reality into another. I guess, for example, let's say if I had a friend who slipped on a wet floor and broke their leg, right? I could use phenomena intervention to wipe the possibility they got hurt by overriding it with one they never slipped and hurt themselves. Essentially that, just like, there's also, ways that could go about it. For example, my friend slipped and got hurt. So I override with a phenomenon where they don't get hurt. There's also a phenomenon or an event where they slipped and only broke their arm or something like that. So now I can go back to an example I can use for an observers. How do things work with this whole observer thing? So, for example, someone like Arcana, he was observed by Kokonoe in his liquid Seether form, which is what he came to be in reality, as normally Seether is when Seether is in a liquid form, it would normally vanish after a set amount of time. But thanks to Kokonoe observing Arcana and keeping his existence in a fixed state, it allows him to stay alive without fading away. So that's pretty much how Arcana gets to move about and how he gets to still live, because liquid Seether is a thing, it usually just disappears after a while, but Kokonoe acknowledges Arcana as he is, therefore it keeps him that way. She essentially just willed the form he uses into reality, and that's what he came to be in reality. So now the thing about an observer is that they must constantly observe both themselves and the target of their observation, because if they slip up, both the observer and the target will essentially disappear at the same time, which means they have to have their eyes on their own existences and the existences of another to maintain themselves in reality, if that makes sense. So essentially, if I was an observer and I wanted if I prevented a person's death, right? No, I don't want to use that example. I want to use that example later. Let's say let's use like a person, like example. I brought someone from the boundary that died over 100 years ago. Let's say like the Celica example. If I brought them into reality using phenomena intervention again, right? And I was able to keep their existences in a fixed state when I brought them from the boundary, I am their observer now. And that means once I observe them, now I'm an observer. And I have to observe myself. So essentially, if I slip up and stop observing them in any form, then they exist and then I exist. Then I cease to... crap. Then they cease to exist, then I cease to exist. So essentially, I have to keep observing them, or else I'll just disappear and they'll disappear, etc., etc. A person can also self-observe themselves. Now, it seems weird how I just mentioned that you need to observe yourself, but you can actually just self-observe, like straight up self-observe, to prevent your own death. But the only person that's really used it was Terrame, because he's a soul that needs a vessel in order to stay alive anyway, lest he fade away. And he's just a weird existence anyway, so he's able to create a physical, temporary form for himself through self-observation, because he's, as I said before, he's a special existence, and he shouldn't even be alive in the current day. Hakim is also one of those kind of beings that shouldn't exist in the current day, and he requires to be under constant observation in order to, move about. His character shouldn't exist in the current timeline, so woo. And observing someone is a dangerous technique, which is obviously the risk of the observer vanishing away in an instant is high, along with their target, or targets, because one person can observe more than one person, as well as multiple observers can observe one individual. So now I can go over what the observers are in BlazBlue. There is the origin, which is, you know, the opposite of the person who uses the Amaterasu unit. They're the most powerful of all observers since they observe literally everything. Takabaga Hara at one point observed Terami. Noelle is the successor to the Azure, and she had observed Terami in order to bring his existence into reality. She also observed, I forgot, I think she observed other characters, I can't remember exactly. She did observe Tsubaki during her fight. I don't know if that makes her an exact observer of Tsubaki, but she observed Tsubaki at her fight, so yeah. Rachel is also an onlooker, and I will get into that in a minute, what the hell that actually means, and she observed Hakuin at one point. Amani Nishiki is also the onlooker of the world, and he offered to observe Ragna, but Ragna turned him down. Clavis Alucard is an onlooker, and he hasn't observed an actual person yet, but he can use Phenomenon Intervention, which automatically would make him an observer. Not automatically, because I think there are characters that can use Phenomenon Intervention without being observers. So, but yeah, the only ones you really know is the characters who've used Phenomenon. So I think in order to even be an observer, you have to have Phenomenon Intervention. That's obviously that. And if you do possess Phenomenon Intervention, you are automatically an observer. Anyway, Kokonoe, she had observed, as I said before, she observed Arcuna, and she did observe Hakuin once she salvaged him from the boundary. Relius also observed Arcuna because he was going to have some plans to use him as a black beast at one point or another. Izanami observed Terami just to keep his existence in bay because she needed to use him. Terami observed himself in order to maintain his existence, but he only self-observed for about a week at most because he needs a vessel for his soul to go into. And Lychee is an observer, but she's not very good at it because she kind of needs Ars Magus in order to amplify her observation, which sucks. But yeah, shouldn't be doing that. But she tried to observe Arcuna. So Arcuna has about 3 different observers, you know, just to keep him existent. Because again, he's just liquid seether, and yeah. But anyway, as I said before, that was the definition of observer, and I've thrown the term onlooker around. See, the thing is about BlazBlue is that in its localization, they merged the terms observer and onlooker together. But then again, an onlooker has the power to observe. They're essentially just a super observer, but yeah. But the point is, onlookers and observers are different things. An onlooker is actually this very powerful being that exists outside of logic itself, and they watch over the events of the world and cannot intervene in these events. And they even transcend the very act of phenomena intervention in the first place. And on top of that, they remember every event that has taken place in the world throughout various timelines. Hell, Rachel demonstrates that by just throwing information to the audience that she remembered each and every time loop phase. Again, the onlooker is a super observer. They don't call it super observer, but it might as well just be one. But obviously Amaterasu is the observer, the top observer, because it's a god, and onlookers are kind of godlike creatures. Not gods, but actually kind of like godlike creatures without being outright classified as gods. They're essentially just super powerful anyway, so they might as well just be gods to other people. But anyway, there can only be one onlooker at a time in the world, as the oldest one in the series can really be traced back to Clavis Alucard. Obviously, there's probably ones before him, but considering Clavis is so old and he maintained his position as an onlooker for so long, he's the oldest one we know of. So, as I said before, continuous intervening in the events of the world will cause the current onlooker to be wiped out from existence, which is, you know, what I guess happened to Clavis Alucard, because at least that's my theory, because he got old and died, and considering he's the Lone Life King and he's been alive for so long, I don't think it was just because he got super old and then just died. Again, vampires aren't exactly immortal in the series. At least I don't think so. They're exactly immortal. But my guess is that, you know, maybe Clavis had used his power a little bit too much and then, you know, he died because of it. I don't know. We don't know. But anyway. After Clavis lost his position as the onlooker, it was passed down to Rachel, and she kept intervening with the events of the world, which had stripped her of most of her power, as well as her right as an onlooker of the world, which was later passed down to Amani Nishiki. So, You know, already as an onlooker of the world, you're already this top class being with a lot of powers. Hell, becoming the onlooker automatically means you're super strong. They even give you the power, as you become an onlooker. But you know, too much intervening with the events of the world, like major events at least, will kill you. You know, if you do it too much, you will vanish from this world. And if you do it just enough, you'll just be weak and powerless. Rachel had to essentially go to the entirety of Central Fiction just super weak. And she couldn't do anything, honestly. She couldn't even teleport anymore. That's how bad it was. So Amane is now the current onlooker of the world. So there's that. It is exactly unknown how or why observers and onlookers are chosen. But 9 mentions that in Central Fiction that it has something to do with the world. Quote unquote, the world. Choosing them as the world always needs an onlooker and observers. Especially an onlooker, because when one dies or loses their powers, another one takes their place. So yeah, that's observers and onlookers in a nutshell. That's actually not that hard to explain. I hope I really hope someone understood all that.